Bona tarda a totes. Jo em dic Antonella i us acompanyaré en aquesta segona part de la jornada del Centre Delàs. Jo soc tècnica del Centre Delàs i abans de començar amb aquest altre debat que té el títol de Repunt al militarisme i les polítiques del més fort a l'esfera internacional, m'agradaria molt agrair les intervencions de les companyes i de les ponents de la primera taula, perquè és molt important recordar-nos del que està passant a Palestina i també connectar-lo a propostes positives, d'accions que podem fer per donar el nostre suport des d'aquí. Llavors, moltes gràcies i també per delinear el negoci que hi ha darrere de tota l'estructura d'ocupació i genocidi que és l'estat d'Israel. I ara passarem a aquest altre debat i intentarem analitzar una mica tota aquesta nova cursa d'armament, del rearme que estem vivint, tant a nivell europeu i tant a nivell internacional, a altres països. I per fer això tenim aquí companyes i amigues de l'International Peace Bureau i d'altres campanyes internacionals on com a Centre Delàs nosaltres fem part. I llavors dono la benvinguda a les ponents d'aquesta taula. Tenim aquí el Gerson, que és activista, pacifista i acadèmic nord-americà. Joseph és president de la Campaign for Peace, Disarmament and Common Security i també copresident electe de l'International Peace Bureau i serà el primer a fer la seva intervenció avui. I després seguirem amb Corazon Fabros, que també és membre de l'International Peace Bureau i que també una veu molt coneguda dins de l'Asia Europe People's Forum i de la Stop Coalition Philippines. Gràcies, Cora, també per estar aquí amb nosaltres. I acabarem amb la intervenció de Katerina Anastasiou, que és la responsable d'Estratègia Global i Migracions de l'organització Transform Europe i també membre de la coordinació europea de la campanya Stop ReArm Europe, on també fem part com a Centre Delàs. I llavors ara deixaré uns 15 minuts a cadascú dels ponents per fer la seva intervenció i al final de les 3 intervencions deixarem un espai també al públic per fer preguntes. Us demanem de no ser gaire llargs perquè tampoc tenim gaire temps per totes les preguntes, però intentarem donar l'espai a tothom i podem començar amb l'aportació del Gerson. Gràcies.
Thank you. It's quite a panel to be following on. First, I want to thank Centre Delàs, actually the local government here who helped get me here, and to IBP for the opportunity to be here. I knew I was going to be jet lagged, so I've got a written speech and I hope you'll tolerate that. As an anti-Zionist Jew, born in 1946, my understandings of authoritarianism are rooted in the lessons of the Nazi Holocaust and of World War II. Among the lessons I was taught was never again to anyone, never to participate in the crime of silence by turning away, and the absolute correlation between truth, untruth, and who lives and who dies and how. 2 of the books that were especially important to me were Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism and Karl Jasper's book on the questions of German guilt. But there were others. Essential to Arendt's analysis of Nazi Germany and Stalin's Soviet dictatorship was her understandings of the central roles played by fear, terror, and ideology, all designed to destroy individuality. This led to interpersonal atomization, isolation, and totalitarian control of society. Essential to these processes is the assault on and manipulation of truth. These dynamics are all at play today in the United States, as they are in different ways in China and Russia. A friend of mine put it this way: we are dealing with a very powerful and aggressive fascist force in the United States, but the United States is not yet fascist. Fortunately, there is broad popular, legal, academic, and media resistance to the Trump MAGA fascism. Just this past weekend, more than 7 million of us were in the streets with the call of no kings, no dictatorship. But the truth is also that I could be arrested and tried as a terrorist if what I have to say here is misinterpreted as anti-Americanism, rather than as the affirmations of constitutional democracy, enlightenment, and human rights that they are. In 1787, Benjamin Franklin, one of the authors of the U.S. experiment in anti-monarchical democracy, was asked, "What have you got, a republic or a monarchy?" His answer, quote, "A republic if you can keep it." 2.5 centuries later, billionaire kleptocratic autocrats are on the offensive, among them Trump, whose father was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, as well as by Musk and Thiel, whose worldviews were forged in African apartheid. The Trump MAGA rise and seizure of power is the consequence of at least 4 forces. Unresolved racism, whose origins lie in the country's original sin of slavery. I just learned today that Catalonia has a bit of history in the slave trade as well. It traces to the loss of Roosevelt-Johnson New Deal values, combined with neoliberal greed and the technological and structural changes that have allowed the creation of the billionaire class and growing economic inequality. Third, we look to the corruptions in the Democratic Party that date to President Clinton and earlier. And finally, to the lost and endless post-Cold War imperial wars fought by the United States in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and elsewhere, combined with the rise of China and of the global South, which have accelerated the relative decline of the United States. In the US, we speak of the Trump MAGA regime as flooding the zone, illegal and unconstitutional assaults that come at us faster than we can keep track or respond. Over the past 40 years, our Supreme Court has been stacked with extreme right-wing ideologues, and Republicans in Congress have given up holding the executive branch accountable, fearing that they will lose their status and their privileges as they opportunistically clip their heels in response to each nationally destructive Trump demand. There is a reason that our massive and smaller rallies across the United States have been mobilized under the slogan, "No King." As I said, I could be prosecuted for what I say here. Many of us are now working to understand the implications and to respond to a little-noticed national security directive that identifies, quote, anti-Christian and anti-American values as indicators of radical left violence. NSPM number 7, called Countering Domestic Terrorism and Organized Political Violence, directs the Justice Department, the FBI, and other national security agencies departments to, quote, take action against anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, anti-Christianity, extremism on migration, extremism on race and gender, hostility to traditional American family values, and traditional views on religion, and to American views of morality. You want to talk about fascism? Reading and listening to our daily news has become painful, even when it doesn't include deep fake propaganda that actually comes from the White House. On a daily basis, we read or hear about the government's illegal and unconscionable actions. Innocent immigrants, and sometimes even citizens, are kidnapped from our streets, from their homes and workplaces by masked Gestapo-like police in the Trump MAGA white nationalist ethnic cleansing campaign. Not only Palestine, but we have ethnic cleansing and efforts to restore apartheid in the United States. The Supreme Court has authorized racial profiling by police, and as a result, my Latino grandson, who is a citizen, lives in fear of being arrested, incarcerated, maybe even being sent to a concentration camp in a far-off country. And the former FBI director and the former New York Attorney General have been indicted for lack of loyalty and for attempting to hold Trump accountable for a few of his many crimes. The writers Orwell and Vonnegut and the historian Howard Zinn wrote that if we don't know our history, we cannot be free. Now, in the tradition of Putin, Xi, and Orban, our press faces constant threats and restrictions and is subject to deepfake videos. Not unlike German universities and museums and industry in the 1930s and 40s, Trump is now requiring institutions of higher learning to align with MAGA ideology. Priority funding will go to universities like the University of Texas, which revise their curriculum, including any criticism of conservative ideas, and hire faculty who align with MAGA commitments. References to diversity, equity, and inclusion are being banned from universities, workplaces, and even the military. Thus, the history of slavery and the struggles for justice are being literally whitewashed, with curricula rewritten, books vanishing from some libraries, and even photographs of brutally abused slaves being removed from some museums. Beyond history, the president, who once recommended injecting cleaning agents, including bleach, to overcome COVID, has unleashed a war on science, blocking billions of dollars needed for research and unleashing his anti-vaxxer Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert Kennedy, against our health systems and against our very lives. It's a race to the bottom. They say that history does not repeat itself, but it can rhyme. Recently, I was reading about Charles de Gaulle, and I found that during his first term as president of the French head of state, he humiliated a member of his cabinet, saying, "I choose the most stupid man because I think he would be the most loyal." Bingo. The Nobel Prize economist Paul Krugman put it succinctly: "We're being ruled by an autocracy of dunces." 3 weeks ago, at an enormous expense, Trump and his Secretary of Defense, the former TV personality who has installed a makeup room in the Pentagon and supports Christian Crusader tattoo to advertise his commitments, not to laugh, this is dangerous stuff. He ordered 800 generals and admirals from around the world to assemble at a Marine base in Virginia. The gathering's purpose was a deeply held secret, arousing fears that, like other banana republics, our military would be required to pledge loyalty to Trump and not to the Constitution. Instead, with obvious displeasure, these generals and admirals endured embarrassing, racist, and rambling bloviation from the commander-in-chief. Trump's incoherence was so unhinged that it raised questions about possible invocation of the 25th Amendment that provides for the removal of an incapacitated president. The generals and admirals had to sit through a soliloquy about how presidents should walk to avoid falling, condemnations of fat, and disregard for racial gender equality. Still more disturbing, the president urged the military to use Trump's accelerating troop deployments to U.S. cities as training grounds to fight the enemy within. That's the exact quote. This is understood to mean urban communities of color. Do I have the right page here? I'm sorry. He told them to be, no, it's the wrong page here, sorry. This was followed with a brutal and dehumanizing effect in Chicago and a warning from Governor Pritzker that the deployments are being made in part to seize ballot boxes during our 2026 midterm elections. The day after the Assembly of Generals and Admirals, in an example of the Trump MAGA primacy of fascism over morale, the Pentagon moved to instill fear among 5,000 of its most senior officers and employees. They are now required to sign non-disclosure agreements and will be subject to random polygraph tests to confirm their loyalty to Trump and prevent embarrassing leaks. Then let me move to militarism, which I was also asked to address. With the post-Cold War era now history, we faced an increasingly dangerous time, reminiscent of the years leading to World War I. We have a Thucydides trap of rising and declining powers, the dynamic that has often led to catastrophic wars. We have arms races with new technologies, complex and uncertain alliance structures, intense economic competition and integration, growing nationalism, territorial disputes, and wildcard actors from Trump and Putin to Lai in Taiwan and Britain's Farage. Compounding these dynamics is the Ukraine war, which is in fact a war between Putin and the West over Europe's future, and which still carries the danger of escalation to nuclear war. No longer contained to the Ukrainian borderlands, drones that threaten airports and infrastructure compound a fear that is helping to drive European military preparations, spending, and operations. My second frame of reference comes from a Chilean Methodist minister who was imprisoned and tortured by the Pinochet dictatorship and was later exiled in the United States. At a meeting of U.S. peace movement organizers in the 1980s, he was asked, "When do you know if you have a military government?" His response, "Look at your national budget." In the US, more than half of the national government discretionary spending is devoted to the military and military-related institutions like the CIA, the National Security Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and so on. With that budget now exceeding $1 trillion and totaling 40% of world military spending, not counting its arms sales, US military spending is greater than that of Russia and China's combined. This, while despite ostensible Trump MAGA America First commitments, our educational, health, and social welfare services are being slashed and all lag behind those of most advanced nations. China, which has been modernizing its military for the past 30 years and now rivals US power in the Western Pacific, is responsible for just 12% of world military spending, while it produces 4 times the number of engineers as in the US. It says something about the future we'll face. Despite its imperial intrusions in the South China Sea, or the West Philippine Sea if you want it, with some success, Beijing advertises itself as a stabilizing force in the era of Trump turmoil and dangers. Long ago, as was mentioned earlier, President Eisenhower wisely warned about the dangers of the military-industrial complex, whose tentacles subvert democracy. Members of Congress are not only lobbied by the Pentagon and major military contractors, they are also expected to bring home military profits and jobs for their districts and states. Failing to bring home the military pork can spell the end of a political career. And this militarism permeates our schools, sports, and even the arts. Thus, military Keynesianism has long been a driving force of the US political economy, and it appears that Germany and others in Europe are about to adopt this dangerous and corrupting model. Of course, the US is not the only power or nation with a military-industrial complex. With the rise of China, we are now 3 scorpions in a nuclear bottle. In addition to Ukraine, the most dangerous potential nuclear flashpoint, is Taiwan, where Chinese government remains committed to finish the nation's civil war via reunification with what it perceives to be a rebel province. Meanwhile, within the US Congress, the Taiwan Relations Act and the US 7th Fleet are resolved, possibly with nuclear weapons, to reinforce US Asia-Pacific hegemony by defending the island's democracy and its de facto, if not de jure, independence. As we learned from this year's India-Pakistan war, the danger of nuclear war, which could lead to global cooling and the deaths and starvation of up to 2 billion people, is not limited to the greatest nuclear powers. And in an era of cyber warfare, AI technologies, and preparations for total war, military and imperial power depends on more than bullets, bombs, and missiles and the number of armed soldiers. Europe, we must acknowledge, finds itself between a rock and a hard place, between NATO and the increasingly autocratic and greedy United States on the one side, and on the other, Russia, whose response to NATO expansion was the invasion of Ukraine and its call for the rollback of from NATO by former Soviet republics. Neither subservient kowtowing to Trump and his 5% demand for NATO spending increases, nor ambitions to create a parallel and independent European superpower are the answers. Like the US, trading the welfare state for the warfare state will result in growing economic securities that further open the way for fascist and neo-Nazi right, as we see in Germany, Britain, and elsewhere in Europe. Spain, with its refusal to increase its military spending, provides a better model. At the most basic level, as the forces of fascism and neoliberalism threaten our freedom and our most basic human rights, the imperative is to insist on respect for our dignity, for constitutional democracy, and for the rule of legitimate law. Not all law is legitimate. Israeli apartheid law is law, but it's not legitimate. To paraphrase Martin Luther King, now is the time to make real promises to democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valleys of authoritarianism, deceit, and militarism to the sunlight path of justice and peace. Now is the time to lift our nations from the quicksands of brutality and injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood, and now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. But I have a little bit more, I'm sorry. And while it is difficult to mobilize people and actions for abstractions, it is past time that we revive the call for common security. It can serve as a model for mutual aid, justice, and equality within our societies, And it was the paradigm with which the Cold War was ended even before the fall of the Berlin Wall, and which served as the basis for the first years of the post-Cold War order in Europe. Common security achieves peace through strategic empathy, recognition of the fears and insecurities that our actions engender on other nations, and respect for the truism that we cannot win security against our rivals. Security is only possible through the sometimes demanding diplomacy that addresses and resolves fears on all sides. This applies to Israelis and Palestinians as much as it does to Americans, Russians, and Chinese. Friends, we make our road by walking. I look forward to our journey, which must include revitalization of the United Nations Charter and renewed respect for international law and the implementation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. In Europe, it requires negotiation of a new regional security architecture. It means reinforcing the welfare, not the warfare state. And of necessity, it would include European nuclear weapons-free zone and a new conventional forces in Europe agreement. We have the outlines, some of us, Cora included here, worked on the outlines of an Indo-Pacific common security report and model, as well as the earlier, the Palma one and one that IPB did a couple of years ago. So that's what I've got. The struggle in the United States is intense. We don't know our future, and we look forward to help and solidarity from you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Like Joseph, I wanted to make sure that I could say what I needed to say this evening. So I have a código. I have prepared some text. For the PowerPoint is more to kind of discipline me, that I don't go beyond the time, and I hope I would be able to do that. First, let me say, express our gratitude to Centre Delàs and the city government of Barcelona, and for everyone who made it possible for us to come together tonight. As I have said earlier, it's always good to speak after Joseph, because somehow he lays the context, the broader context of what I have to say tonight. So, friends, warm greetings of peace from the Philippines and from the International Peace Bureau. It is an honor to join you today at this important conference, Darkest Before Dawn. So the title really strikes me so much, and I will say more towards the end. Where we gather to confront the deepening crisis of our times. Crisis of war, crisis of democracy, of humanity itself. While my friends, Joseph and Katerina, will speak on the United States and Europe, I will share a view from the Asia-Pacific region. A region that has become both a front line and a fault line in this new global militarization. So we stand in the crossroads. You know, this is something that I recall we have used in the Philippines back in 1989 while we were preparing to vote against the treaty between the United States and the Philippines. And our hope then was for the permanent removal of US military bases in the Philippines. And well, those were moments, because after that, we found ourselves again with the foreign military bases, with more of our lands being occupied. We're almost like, you know, the Philippine archipelago being a big US military base. So across the world, the dominance of the United States is waning. But instead of leading to peace, we see the rise of multipolar competition, new imperial ambitions vying for control. What we face today is not only a military contest, but a crisis of systems. When capitalism cannot any longer deliver well-being to the majority, it turns to coercion, to war, to nationalism, ultranationalism, in fact, to fear. We see the resurgence of fascism, authoritarianism, misogyny, and militarism normalized as security or defense. So that's the packaging. The so-called Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States is framed as a quest for security, but in truth, it is about containment of China, of independence, of any alternative economic model. This is not a Cold War of ideology, but of markets and resources. Access to the region, and we are witnessing a massive US military buildup in Japan, in South Korea, in many parts of the Pacific, especially Guam, the Marianas, and Palau, as well as Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea unexpectedly, and of course the Philippines. All justified in the name of freedom of navigation and regional stability. Are we really stable? But the result is insecurity, of course, for our peoples, for our communities, and for our environment. So, the International Peace Bureau have pursued a global campaign on military spending. And I think that we found our niche in this campaign, no? The global campaign against military spending, on military spending. And in the last GCOMs or GDAMs that happened, $2.7 trillion in military spending was reported for 2024. The highest ever recorded, and we anticipate that in 2025, it's going to be higher still. And to even imagine, in Asia-Pacific countries, we're leading the increase, unfortunately. And imagine even a fraction of that if redirected to healthcare, education, or climate adaptation, which we badly need, could transform lives, actually. But instead, resources are poured into weapons, war games, and bases, while millions remain in poverty. In Southeast Asia, where I come from, the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, speaks of stability and prosperity, a promise that has always been there for decades already. But reality tells us a different story. Militarization is growing, inequality is widening, and sovereignty is being torn apart by superpower rivalry. ASEAN claims to be in the driver's seat, yet in truth and in fact, it is more than a passenger. In a car driven by Washington and Beijing, the true ASEAN centrality will come only when our policies are centered on the people, not on the elites, and not on the interest of foreign powers, which is what's happening today. In my country, the Philippines, I want to be more concrete. The Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or what we call EDCA, now gives the United States access to 9 military sites. And in fact, they've chosen some words that are acceptable to go around the prohibition of the Philippine Constitution, which we have, earned in 1987, 86, after the People Power Revolution. They say these are for defense. It's a magic word that Filipinos buy into, and I think it's not only the Filipinos, but also most part of Southeast Asia and, of course, the Asia-Pacific region. And we know for a fact from our experience that communities around these agreed locations face displacement, toxic waste, and the threat of sexual violence of women and children. An old experience that is coming back to the Philippines today. At the same time, a new trade deal with the US ties economic concessions to military cooperation, a form of strategic capture. We are being locked once again into dependency, where sovereignty is traded for aid and arms. Across Asia, I would say, and the Pacific, defense budgets grow by double digits every year. It's not only the Philippines, but most of the Asia-Pacific countries, while hospitals, in most cases, run out of medicine and schools are out of teachers that are competent enough for education. Real security is not fighter jets or warships that are actually being marketed to most of the countries in Asia-Pacific region. Real security is food on the table. We know that. Roofs that do not collapse in storms or typhoon, and care when we are sick. War and injustice are two sides of the same, the same system. That is why we must speak of peace and economy at the same breath and depth. At the International Peace Bureau, we advocate common security. I think this is also one of the niche that we would like to continue on, to work on. The idea that no nation can be secure while others live in fear or deprivation. We promote diplomacy, trust building, and disarmament, not containment or confrontation, which we see today the United States first and foremost are doing. Together with partners across Asia and the Pacific, we have outlined 5 vital steps for common security: demilitarizing the Taiwan Strait, which I think Joseph had mentioned earlier, and the South China Sea, or which we in the Philippines prefer to call as the West Philippine Sea, because it is indeed. It belongs to the Philippines. Ending the Korean War, peace in the Korean Peninsula, has always been a big dream for many of us. What is this? Why can't I read it? It's not a handwriting, but I cannot hear it. Stopping nuclear weapons, I'm changing the word actually, expansion, and avoiding block building, we kind of, all this, because these days we are reminded of Bandung Conference that brings to the fore the dreams for non-alignment among nations, especially in Asia. And avoiding, security must be cooperative, not coercive. In the 1970s, our region envisioned a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality. And I think this is also one area that IPB continues to pursue. I hope we get a better work at it. It is time, I'm not pressuring Sean. It is time to revive that vision. I think very important reminder for all of us. A demilitarized, nuclear-free, cooperative Southeast Asia. Our seas should connect us indeed, not divide us. The South China Sea must not become a graveyard of empires. They used to call it American Lake, right? But we now say graveyard of the empires. But a living bridge of solidarity among our peoples. Just like what one of the indigenous leaders in the Pacific, he says, the ocean should connect us for peace. Across Asia, we have overthrown dictatorships and resisted authoritarianism. And I think what the first panel, I think that was Cyril, who said, look at history. Somehow that's how I understood it, and learn from it. Because that is what we basically use as an inspiration and as a guide, for the future. Today we see the strong movements of youth and students and the marginalized sectors. From the Philippines to Indonesia, from, of course, South Korea to Myanmar, from Malaysia to Timor-Leste and West Papua. And South Asia, things that happened there, Bangladesh, and then of course Sri Lanka, Nepal and Pakistan as well as the rest of the Pacific. Some of the actions we might not agree. This is something that is being debated among us in the region. But what stands out is the strong and dynamic participation of the younger generation. And I think it is very important to look at that at this moment. I would say, we get inspiration from Walden Bello, who often reminds us, whether in formal gatherings or informal, conversation. He said, we must now move from resistance to reconstruction. A very challenging thing, and it's not easy to do. Rebuilding our economies and democracies on the foundation of peace, care, and ideological balance. Peace, in fact, is not a dream. It is a political project. It is our survival. Of course, let us advance a people's blueprint. That's how we want to call it. I don't know how. Redirect military budgets towards schools, hospitals, and climate protection. Create a people's security index that measures well-being, not weapons. Demand climate justice very strongly, and I think that, if we are looking at where climate change have really strong impact on the people and the environment, it is in Asia and the Pacific. and we say no more war games in fragile ecosystems. Today, the Philippines host at least 300 war games, most of it from the United States and also now from NATO countries. So it's not only a bit, but I would say really alarming because they're all over the archipelago. And we fight for independent foreign policies. It's not only a terrain of the diplomats, but it should be something that the civil society have to be involved in and to be active and to be more analytical. Loyalty, we are against loyalty to Washington or Beijing, but to our people and to our shared future. Shir and Maha have really given us so much challenge, and I think that it was really great to have them in the first panel because it somehow gives us and enrich our conversation tonight. Friends, we are living in dark times, really, really dark. But it is often the darkest before dawn. Let us use this moment to build unities across borders, across generations, I hope. I'm from the older generation. I cannot deny anymore with my white hair. And across movements. We cannot continue being in our silos. Let us turn this moment of crisis into a moment of creation. We want to see an economy for humanity, grounded on peace, justice, and solidarity. That is the dawn we must bring, and we will do it together. Say, power to the people. Stop the war. Another world is possible. If I have to follow that. And of course, lastly, I'd like to encourage you to tune in the coming months, in fact, in the coming days, because we have important movements that are happening in South Korea, where the APEC is going to happen. The civil society have created a response to APEC that basically brings to the fore the real picture and the real purpose of APEC. And then right after that, people are gathering in Bangkok for the Asia-Pacific Social Forum, bringing all this, but in the center of the conversation would be solidarity for Palestine and connecting all the dots, whether it is about military spending, arms trade, foreign military bases, economy, and all that. But I think the important project that we would like to see is for us to kind of find the way to be able to come together for a united front against the continuing domination and occupation of the military powers that is led by the United States. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cora. Thank you, everyone. It's a little bit difficult after this to speak, also for me. I did write notes, but I don't have a text. I hope I managed to say everything I want to say. Hi, my name is Katerina. I hope you can listen to me, and I hope I'm not speaking too fast, which I tend to do. I will be looking at you if I'm too fast. Say something. I wish I was here to speak about nice and positive stuff, but the situation is quite grave, right? We took a trip now to both sides, let's say, of the American continent, on the Atlantic and the Pacific, and we are right here at the Mediterranean coast. And Cora, you said something that kind of inspired me and made me scrabble a little bit. About the sea that connects, right? Well, this is what the Mediterranean Sea used to do. And it's been years, I mean, many years, that the European Union and many of our nation states have transformed the Mediterranean Sea from a sea of connection to one of the biggest cemeteries of people that die off, and nobody ever writes or says their name, right? So we're in a quite grave situation, at least the people that have what we call a conscience, right? But it seems that at the same time, the whole European Union is in a kind of cognitive dissonance. It's enough to look around the conflicts of the world. Take first a look in Ukraine, take a look at the situation in Congo and other parts of the world where Europe is continuing more or less, or European countries continue more or less to do what they have been doing for the last 200 years, being colonial, taking advantage of environments, people, nature, for the profits of very few people. I think, for example, when Joseph was speaking before, he made a comment saying that it's not, I'm sorry, it was not you, it was the panel before, that it's not always profit, but it's also power. But it seems, at least for our continent, this goes hand in hand. So today, I want to speak first of all about the accelerated militarization of our continent. I'm using this word, and I think it is very, very important to use it because, of course, now people scandalize the fact that we spend so much on weaponaries, or we intend to spend so much in armament, but the reality is this is not a new situation. The Russian invasion in Ukraine, which was, of course, illegal, and we all have condemned, was a kind of excuse to accelerate a process that had been ongoing already. And the first bodies that had to live through the results of this process were migrant bodies, because the first thing we militarized in a very high-tech, sophisticated way was our borders. By the way, Israeli companies have paid quite a responsibility, or we have paid Israeli companies quite a lot on border control. So right now, since 2022, there was a cesure, a stop. Oh my God, Europe is under attack. We need to immediately find a way to defend ourselves because we're completely defenseless. This is a story that has been told and has been continuing and accelerated in the last 3 years. And I think it is imminent to understand why this story is being told in exactly this way. In Europe, we are home to some of the most strongest or most productive weapon industries of the world. Almost all European Union member states are members of NATO, participating in the biggest military alliance of the world. Not a single war that NATO ever did the last decades was a war of defense. So when all of a sudden politicians start bubbling how much in danger we are and how much we need to spend this money now on armament, we need to ask questions. The first question should always be who dies and who leaves? Who's going to go fight that war? This is a development that is also very discouraging right now around the European Union, but also all over Europe, also in countries that are outside the European Union. There is a constant political discourse, for example, in Germany, re-establishing the mandatory service, military service. Same goes for Belgium. Same goes for other countries that didn't, that had abandoned the mandatory military service. When this discourse happens, again, nobody talks about the people who are going to die, the Europeans that are going to be in danger, what is going to be the sacrifice, who's going to be the one profiting from this war. These are the discussions that are never done. We live in a general climate of fear, and there is a constant threat around us. Yeah, and in this moment I will quote a European too, Josep Borrell, where a couple of years ago he made this outrageous speech describing Europe as a garden and the rest of the world as a jungle, and addressing his audience by saying, you know, sometimes the garden has to send out the gardeners to chop around the garden. I mean, how cynical, right? But this is the reality. And at the same time, the same lips that are telling us we're in constant threat, we are in danger, war is imminent, readiness 2030, we need to prepare in the next 5 years because otherwise, well, the same people are the same people that are propagating, for example, misusing, Western values, Western world, and all this discourse, all these values, all these politics, if you want, die in Palestine. And there is this double morale and double standard that we honestly, as Europeans, need to face head on. Why is it, for example, why do we respect the ICJ when it comes to Putin, but we don't respect the ICJ when it comes to Netanyahu? Why is genocide okay when it's happening to the Palestinians, but it's not okay if it's happening to white people? These are questions that that are already necessary, because also, as it was said multiple times in multiple ways, the world as we know it is ending. And the world that is coming needs to be formed. So the question is, with what kind of questions are we going to take, the task on forming it? And looking at the past in the history and at the very, very hypocritical present is very important. Now, I know I'm quite pessimistic. Obviously, you can hear it. I'm not a very pessimistic person at this moment of my life. But at least in the last months, what did gave some power, motivation, energy to continue is the fact that a lot of people around Europe, millions of people around Europe, are not going to take it. And this is obvious on the streets, here in Spain, in Italy where I live, in Greece where I come from. Even in Germany, people are going every day, every week on the street, despite the oppression, the repression, the defamation, the dangers they go through. So why are people taking the streets? And about that, I want to speak now for another 3-4 minutes. The ReArm Europe plan, as I said before, is an acceleration, a turbo, motor of militarization of Europe. It's not a new direction in the foreign policy of Europe, but it's an accelerated situation. And then there is the problem that the European leadership has right now with alignment. Are they going to align with Trump? Or are they going to try to be autonomous? And inside this conflict, a lot of bad things have space. The ReArm Europe plan was announced in March, declaring that about 800 billion will be spent collectively. This is this is also important to understand. It is not one-to-one all the expenditure of all countries, but we're talking now about collective expenditure that is also going to happen through debt. It's money that doesn't exist. And as it always happens in these cases, who's going to pay the bill? What do you think?
You.
We. Yeah? So we're here in Spain. I told you I'm Greek. 2008, when the banks collapsed, and 2010, when the Troika arrived, we were told, okay, we need to spend less. We lived above our means. Austerity is now what is necessary because there is no other way to do fiscal politics. And now the very same people forget about all of the strict fiscal politics. Why? To improve, for example, our fire departments because we're burning every year? No. To improve our healthcare sector because we're all suffering? No. To buy weapons. And this is, I think, something that is really clear for the majority of the people in Europe. And you see it also in the way resistance to this militarization process is organized. Because it exits, let's say, the usual peace and cycles. It enters in other social movements. You have now the climate movement discussing about militarization. You have the anti-racist movement also critiquing militarization. You have the labor movement, the workers' movement, really understanding that it's all or nothing now. If we let this pass, the future that expects us is one where European citizens become deplorables, and is a future of military Keynesianism, something we see in the US, where there are different classes, those who die and those who get to live, those who get to profit and those who get to suffer. So, yeah, I really ruined the mood in the room. Anyway, when the ReArm Europe plan was announced, to finish with a little bit of energy, a lot of us got together, Centre Delàs, IPB, Transform, Archie, I don't even remember, TNI, the European Attack Network, a lot of us got together to figure out what we're going to do. And we brought to life this campaign called Stop ReArm Europe. You can check it out. The internet site is stoprearmeurope.eu. This campaign is more or less an effort we're making to organize the organized. It's a campaign open to organizations. We want to motivate organizations that are also out of the peace context to participate in this campaign. And maybe I say some dates for the next. In 2 weeks, we're going to be again in Barcelona. I don't know if Luca is in the room from Novact, but Stop ReArm is going to be part of the Unsilence Forum. And in the next 3 weeks, we're going to start mobilizing and campaign with a letter to European parliamentarians against the upcoming budget vote. We know that this is not, I want to be very honest with you, I don't think we can stop it right now. But what we can do is affect the next long-term budget. And this is something we have to do. So we need to try. We have a test drive in the next weeks. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Katerina, Cor, and Joseph, for your presentation. So now, since we are a bit late, we would like to open the floor to the public, but just maximum 2 questions. I'm sorry. One aquí.
Al micro, you want the micro? Yes.
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. I am Alain Rouy from the French peace movement. I agree with all that the speaker said, and I did appreciate Cora's call for action, but I think we need more action and we need more coordinated actions. In Europe, we have a lot of actions, marvelous actions in Italy, in Germany, in the USA too. But in the French peace movement, we think that there is a lack of coordination between all those actions. It's against NATO, for example, there is no very big coordination between the European country, and it's the same at the global level. That's why we think that the IPB has to play a leading role for coordinating or for building a global front for peace. This idea came in Japan too, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I called to my presidents. I am vice president of the IPB, and I think we have the opportunity in the coming days to give that answer to your call on action. Thank you very much.
Is there another question or? Sí, yeah? Okay.
Bueno, muy buenas noches. Voy a hablar en español, creo que pueden los compañeros allá de catalán traducir al inglés, ¿sí? Bien, maravilloso. Bueno, primeramente muy buenas noches, mi nombre es Gabriel Aguirre, yo soy de Venezuela, pertenezco a la organización War Beyond War y ahora miembro del Consejo del Buró Internacional de la Paz. Estamos muy agradecidos por la invitación que nos han extendido y realmente estamos muy contentos de haber podido llegar a esta ciudad y por supuesto conectar con distintos activistas que están trabajando por la paz en todos los lugares del mundo. Sin lugar a dudas, el fenómeno de la militarización es un fenómeno que está ocurriendo en todo el mundo. Indudablemente el imperialismo viene imponiendo un conjunto de narrativas, como lo hace en el Pacífico, sobre la excusa de la protección. En América Latina lo hace bajo la excusa del combate al narcotráfico, en el Medio Oriente lo hace bajo la excusa del combate al terrorismo, en África lo hace bajo la excusa de la protección y la defensa de la soberanía de algunos países, pero en todo caso son falsas narrativas que en resumidas cuentas lo que nos obliga y lo que va obligándonos progresivamente es a continuar incrementando el gasto militar en todos los lugares del mundo, extendiendo la venta y la comercialización de armas y por supuesto evitando a toda costa que nuestros pueblos puedan defender su soberanía, su independencia y su derecho a la autodeterminación. Estamos en un momento crítico de la humanidad, estamos en las puertas posiblemente de una nueva confrontación y una nueva conflagración mundial y este esfuerzo que realiza el Buró Internacional de la Paz, el Centro de Estudios para la Paz de Barcelona y todas las organizaciones que están aquí desde las distintas latitudes es importantísimo, es maravilloso y no podemos postergarlo. Realmente el momento de actuar es ahora. Nunca antes la humanidad tuvo una urgencia tan importante de articularnos y de construir plataformas globales de acción. Desde América Latina estamos haciendo nuestros esfuerzos. Sabemos que en todos los rincones del mundo los luchadores y los activistas por la paz también lo están haciendo. Queremos traer nuestro mensaje de alegría, nuestro mensaje de entusiasmo y nuestro mensaje de ánimo para seguir trabajando y estamos seguros que la victoria será de los pueblos. De eso estamos completamente convencidos. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, moltes gràcies per les vostres reflexions i ja malauradament no tenim més temps per altres reflexions o preguntes, però us volem agrair l'assistència, haver vingut avui. Volem també agrair molt la feina de les traductores de Koinos. Merci.